When you design a massive, intricate maze, there is this expectation of a journey.
Right, a journey.
Yeah, as the architect, you spend months building the winding paths. You set up the dead ends. You carefully place the traps to test the runner, and you place a massive wheel of cheese at the very center.
The ultimate prize.
Exactly. You expect the people running that maze to explore every single corner, to feel a sense of accomplishment when they finally navigate your masterpiece.
I mean, you want them to engage with the architecture, right? To feel the friction of the puzzle and to learn from their mistakes along the way.
Yeah.
Because that friction is supposed to be where the fun actually lives.
Right. But then you actually let human beings into the maze, and what happens?
They completely ignore the path.
They do not care about your architecture at all. They immediately find a way to scale the outer wall, sprint along the top of the hedges, grab a tiny piece of cheese that was, accidentally left sitting near the entrance gate, and go straight home.
It is the ultimate game design reality check. I mean, players will always inevitably find the path of least resistance.
Always.
And they will run that path repeatedly, even if that specific path is incredibly boring. It's purely because it's the most efficient way to acquire resources.
Okay, let's unpack this, because today we are taking a deep dive into the Path of Exile 2 0.5.3 patch preview, guided by the insights of game director Jonathan Rogers.
A really fascinating preview, honestly.
It really is. And the core mission of this deep dive is to explore exactly that tension between the maze builder and the maze runner. We're looking at how a massive action RPG tackles the underlying philosophy of its endgame grind.
Which is no small task.
No, definitely not, because in patch 0.5.0, the developers successfully introduced you, the player, to all these different seasonal mechanics via heavily guided, engaging quest lines. The roller coaster ride was fantastic.
It was a great onboarding experience.
Yeah, but once you finished the quests and hit the post-quest line endgame content, the rewards completely lost their luster.
And, balancing that post-quest line content is a notoriously brutal challenge in game design.
Oh, I bet.
Because once the narrative is over, the only thing driving the player forward is the mathematical reality of the reward loop. If the time a player invests into a mechanic does not equal the power gained for their character, well, the content is effectively dead on arrival.
They just stop playing it.
Exactly. Players will just stop doing it entirely.
Which brings us to the developer's new mantra for this patch. Basically, no matter what type of content you are a fan of, it must be worth investing your time into.
That's the goal.
So whether you are a hardcore gamer min-maxing the mathematics of your build, or you're just someone fascinated by complex behavioral systems, we're going to see how developers balance risk, reward, and human psychology.
And to really understand this shift, we have to start by looking at how the developers were forced to physically change the game's mechanics. Basically, to stop players from, as the saying goes, optimizing the fun out of the game. We see this most clearly with the Expedition and Abyss mechanics, where player behavior was just completely subverting the developer's intent.
Yeah, let's focus on Grand Expeditions first, because the way players were treating this mechanic was wild.
It really was.
For context, an expedition is a mechanic where you place explosives around a site to unearth dormant monsters and treasure chests. But top-tier, highly optimized players were treating this entire elaborate system like window shopping.
Window shopping is the perfect way to describe it.
Right. Imagine throwing a massive catered dinner party. You've cooked all day, set the table, lit the candles, but your guests walk in the front door, take one single look at the appetizer table in the foyer, decide they don't like the specific arrangement of the deviled eggs, and immediately turn around and walk out the door.
It's a perfect analogy for what was happening.
Yeah.
Players were entering the Grand Expedition area and instantly assessing all the remnants.
And remnants are?
Remnants are essentially the modifiers that dictate both the difficulty of the monsters and the quality of the rewards. So if a player looked at the remnants and realized the setup wasn't mathematically optimal for maximum profit, they were just leaving.
Just walking out?
Exactly. They wouldn't even plant a single explosive. It was a massive, tedious chore for the top-end players who felt forced to constantly reset the instances. And it felt unrewarding for the average player who actually stayed to fight.
So to fix this, the developers decided to just replace the junk. Previously, when you entered a Grand Expedition, you saw a bunch of mostly useless armor and weapon chests scattered around.
Just taking up space, yeah.
But now they're replacing those with actual treasure. The weapon and armor chests have golden icons, which means they appear much less frequently, but when they do appear, they guarantee an exceptional base type.
What's fascinating here is that this is a massive fundamental shift in how loot works. Because to understand why that matters, you have to understand that in an action RPG, the base type of an item is the foundational math for everything you do later.
Right, the starting point.
Yeah. If you find a sword, the base type determines its innate damage before any magical properties are applied. All future crafting multipliers apply to that base number. So if the base is terrible, the fully crafted weapon will be terrible.
That makes sense.
By guaranteeing an exceptional base type, they are ensuring that the fundamental building block of the item is top tier. By shortening the encounter and making base chests strictly better, the devs are respecting the player's time rather than just punishing their farming methods.
They are essentially ensuring that the baseline experience of opening that rare chest actually feels good, rather than feeling like pulling the lever on a slot machine that is rigged against you.
Exactly.
And they applied a similar buff to the monsters you unearth, right? Like each rune passed on by a remnant now applies significantly more rarity bonuses to the monsters.
Yeah, plus they added significantly more remnants to the encounters overall.
Yeah. So if you can overcome the layered difficulty of those modifiers, simply slaying the enemies becomes highly lucrative. But they paired this with a structural change that is really interesting. They reduced the total number of explosives you can place by 25%.
Which is a big cut.
It feels incredibly counterintuitive. In a game designed around keeping players engaged in the grind, they actively made the encounter shorter.
They did.
You get in, you blow up a smaller area, you get the good stuff, and you get out. It seems like they are finally valuing the player's actual time over forcing them into a long, drawn-out slog.
It's a huge philosophy shift.
And that exact same philosophy is applied to the Abyss mechanic, specifically regarding the pinnacle boss of that area, the Vessel of Kulamak.
Right. A pinnacle boss is supposed to be the ultimate grand slam challenge of a specific mechanic. You fight your way through the abyss to reach him, but his signature drop, a unique ring called the Grip of Kulamak, was heavily underperforming.
Why was it underperforming so badly?
Well, it had a massive pool of possible modifiers. A few of those combinations were incredibly powerful, what we call chase items. But the vast majority of the time, the ring dropped with terrible stats and was basically vendor trash.
So the developers did a full pass on the ring's back-end math. They disabled the lesser-used, weaker modifiers entirely and merged several of the mediocre ones together to create stronger hybrid stats.
Which cleans up the loot pool significantly.
Right. By removing the trash modifiers from the pool, they mathematically increase the odds of a player rolling a god-tier version of the ring. But the real kicker isn't just the ring. If you manage to defeat the Vessel of Kulamak at full strength now, the game guarantees an ancient desecration currency drop.
Which is huge.
Yeah.
Guaranteeing a high-tier currency drop is a radical departure from traditional action RPG design. Usually it relies entirely on randomized probability.
Yeah, rolling the dice.
Exactly. This completely removes that crushing feeling of spending 20 minutes fighting a massive, screen-filling boss only to walk away with nothing of value. And they paired this with a crucial bug fix in the abyssal depths, where rare monsters were sometimes failing to spawn at all.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And now the final large abyssal trove you find at the end of the depths will also always drop desecrated currency.
Meaning Abyss actually feels like descending into a cavern of ancient treasure rather than descending into an abyss of wasted time.
Precise.
But, transitioning from this intentional design flaws where developers built something that just didn't can out are one thing. The code was working. The design just wasn't fun.
Right.
But the developers also had to address unintentional code bugs that completely inverted the game's reality. Which brings us to the delirium dilemma.
This is where the underlying mathematics of the game's engine started buckling under the weight of player optimization. Delirium, for context, is a mechanic where a thick, nightmare fog rolls over the landscape.
It sounds spooky.
It is. The deeper you go into the fog, the more exponentially difficult the monsters become, but the loot multipliers go through the roof.
The concept is fantastic. A scaling nightmare of difficulty and reward. But the developers discovered some severe structural bugs.
Really bad ones.
Yeah. There is a mechanic called the delirium bar, which dictates what spawns in the fog. Special shards on this bar, specifically the purple mirror shards, are supposed to spawn highly rewarding, intensely powerful elite monsters. But due to a bug, these shards were completely unable to spawn magic or rare variants of those elites.
Which represents a catastrophic failure of the economic loop. In Path of Exile, standard monsters drop standard loot. Magic and rare monsters are the ones carrying the massive loot multipliers.
So if they don't spawn.
Exactly. If your elite monsters are hard-coded to only spawn as basic enemies, the entire economic incentive to engage with the mechanic collapses.
And the coding errors went even deeper. If a player popped multiple purple mirror shards at the same time, intending to multiply those elite monsters and flood the map with high-value targets, the game just failed to process
Is
it.
there nothing?
It had zero effect. Popping 3 shards gave you the exact same result as popping 1. The patch notes confirm this now adds significantly more elites to your map, exactly as it was originally intended. But the absolute wildest bug involved the Grand Mirror mechanic.
Oh, the Grand Mirror.
Oh.
That is essentially the pinnacle of what players call juicing their maps, engineering the absolute highest possible difficulty for the highest possible payout.
Right. Players were using items to make their maps between 150% and 200% delirious. This is the hardest, most punishing content a player could possibly engineer.
The ultimate challenge.
And what did the game do? It spawned 0 delirium monsters, 0 mirror shards. The highest juicing levels actually broke the spawn logic entirely. The ultimate challenge made the league worse.
So the players who spent hours optimizing their characters, pushing the game to its absolute mathematical limits, were being rewarded with an empty ghost town. The fog was there, but the monsters were gone.
So the developers go in and they fix these bugs. The purple shards finally work, the elites actually spawn as rares with massive loot tables, and the 200% delirious maps are fully populated.
Everything is working as intended.
But here is the catch. By fixing the code, Delirium became terrifyingly hard because suddenly all those hyper-scaled monsters that were supposed to be there all along actually exist.
Right. They are finally in the game.
So to compensate for fixing their own game, the developers took the baseline scaling that Delirium applies to monsters, and they halved it.
They cut the foundational difficulty in half, yes. And to maintain the endgame challenge, they made it so each subsequent Delirium tablet you apply after the first one adds scaling back at a rapid pace. Meaning by the time you hit 3 tablets, the difficulty is exactly the same as it was before the patch.
Okay, wait, so the hardest difficulty in the game was actually totally empty because of a bug. But if they fixed it, and then immediately have the baseline scaling for everyone, aren't they basically nerfing the casual experience just to save the hardcore players from getting crushed? I mean, why make the entry point easier just because the top end was fundamentally broken?
That is a very natural assumption to make. But you have to look at what fixing the game actually meant mechanically in this context. Fixing the bug meant unleashing a literal tidal wave of incredibly powerful, highly scaled elite enemies that simply were not present in the game world before today.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, if the developers had kept the baseline scaling exactly where it was, and then jumped all these newly functioning, highly lethal rares on top of it, the early endgame would have become an absolute brick wall for the average player.
Okay. The casual player walking into their first Delirium Fog would just get instantly vaporized by an elite that wasn't there yesterday.
Precisely. Having the baseline isn't about nerfing the game for casuals. It's about establishing a functional ramp. In game design, you have to give the player a ramp to climb. If the very first step on the staircase is a 10-foot vertical wall of rare monsters, nobody gets to climb it.
That makes a lot of sense.
Right. By softening the baseline difficulty, but allowing the Delirium tablets to scale the danger back up rapidly, they preserve the terrifying, aspirational difficulty for the hardcore players at the top, while making the initial entry point mathematically playable.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. You have to build the ramp, but creating a ramp only solves the entry-level problem. The developers still had a major issue at the very end of that ramp. How do you stop the final, most brutal challenges from feeling like an unfair, arbitrary punishment?
The answer is remarkably elegant. You hand the steering wheel back to the player and let them build a wall themselves.
Let's look at how they are applying this to simulacrums, because this mechanic was really struggling to remain relevant in the late endgame. A simulacrum is a wave-based survival arena.
Like a horde mode.
Exactly. Previously, you walked in, and the difficulty started at 0% deliriousness and slowly climbed. Now, the encounter skips the warm-up entirely. It begins at 100% deliriousness and rams all the way up to a staggering 200% over the course of the run. But to balance this, they entirely remove the old wave modifiers.
Which is a crucial detail to focus on. Those old wave modifiers were just random stat buffs given to enemies. They didn't make the encounter any more rewarding. They just arbitrarily made the monsters hit harder or move faster.
It was pure friction.
Exactly. It was punishment without a corresponding payoff.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. Instead of those arbitrary randomized modifiers, the developers added a brand new mechanic. After you survive and complete a boss room in the simulacrum, the game presents you with an optional choice between three mirror shards.
An optional choice.
Right. You can consciously choose to add bosses to all subsequent rooms. You can choose to add modifiers to make the area harder, but significantly more rewarding. You can choose to add more monsters, including elites, to increase the density, or you can select none at all.
This raises an important question about the evolution of artificial difficulty versus true player agency. In the past, action RPGs relied heavily on random number generation to create friction.
Yeah, the invisible dice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You walk into a room, the server rolls some invisible dice, and maybe you get destroyed by an entirely unfair combination of monster traits that you had no control over. By letting the player choose their exact poison bosses versus density, the game moves from frustrating randomness to strategic risk management.
But introducing the select none option is a stroke of psychological genius. It acts as an emotional escape valve. If your character is barely surviving the current waves and the game offers you a choice to add more bosses or more elites, you don't feel forced into a fail state.
You can just opt out.
Yeah, you just click, no thanks, I'm good, and you keep going. You don't feel like the game cheated you, and you don't feel like you failed the run. You feel like you made a strategic choice to preserve your current loot.
It fundamentally moves the game away from frustrating randomness. You are actively choosing your exact poison. Does your specific character build handle dense packs of smaller monsters better? Or are you built to assassinate single-target bosses? You get to tailor the environmental difficulty to your specific build strengths and weaknesses.
And we see this exact same philosophy of scaling and agency being applied over in the breach mechanics.
Right, the breach biomes.
Yeah, a breach is essentially an area you open up that floods the map with otherworldly monsters and structures called hive fortresses. Apparently, these fortresses felt fine while playing through the campaign, but they were incredibly underwhelming when players tried to farm them at high levels.
Just not enough density.
So the developers expanded the canvas. They made the breach biomes much bigger, which allows them to pack significantly more hives into a single breachstone map.
And by expanding the physical space of the encounter, they give the player more room to maneuver. This allows for higher density combat without it feeling completely claustrophobic.
To make those larger biomes even more enticing, using multiple breach stones to open the area now adds new abilities to Aelith.
Who's a great addition, by the way.
She is. For listeners who might not be familiar, Aelith is an allied presence that assists you during these specific breach encounters. The more resources you invest, the stronger she gets. For example, if you use multiple stones, Aelith gains a new ability called Nemesis, which causes her to actively spawn rare monsters into the fight.
Again, we see the core theme here, giving the player the tools to dictate their own level of risk and reward. If your build needs more rare monsters to farm for high-tier loot, you commit the resources, you use multiple breach stones, and the game obliges by having your ally literally summon them for you.
Which transitions us from simply managing your risk into the ultimate expression of player agency in Path of Exile to the philosophy of corruption. We are talking about taking massive, unpredictable gambles where you could lose everything. Let's look at the changes to the temple and the vault mechanics.
This is perhaps one of the most conceptually fascinating changes in the entire patch.
Let's set the stage. Previously, there was a specific node on the Atlas passive tree. And for anyone who hasn't stared at it for hours, it's basically a massive, overarching skill tree that dictates the rules of the endgame world itself.
It's a huge system.
If you selected this specific node, it caused rewards from the temple mechanic to just magically drop in ordinary areas. Now, on paper, that sounds incredibly powerful, but it completely undermined the actual gameplay loop of building the temple yourself.
Right, it made no sense.
Why would a player spend time carefully constructing a dangerous temple if the rewards just drop in your lap while walking through a random forest?
It was entirely cannibalizing its own design. I mean, it is like spending weeks building a complex, room-sized Rube Goldberg machine just to pour yourself a cup of coffee, only to have a barista walk into your living room and hand you an espresso before you pull the first lever.
That is a brilliant way to put it.
It renders your entire effort pointless. It was an optimization shortcut that destroyed the core loop of the gameplay.
So the developers completely tore it down. Now, if you allocate that specific Atlas node, activating a Vol beacon in the world unpredictably corrupts a rare or unique enemy in your immediate area.
And it is truly unpredictable.
Oh, when the developers say unpredictably, they mean it. The monster might gain a slew of additional modifiers, becoming significantly more dangerous, essentially transforming into a lethal, run-ending threat. Or the monster might receive massive, incredibly valuable reward enhancements. It leans entirely into the ancient Vol lore themes of corruption, immense danger, and massive risk.
What's fascinating here is that this is a masterclass in creating what designers call water cooler moments.
Water cooler moment?
Yeah. When a gaming system is perfectly mathematically balanced and entirely predictable, it is fair, but it is often deeply forgettable.
Yeah.
You just do the math and collect the reward. But when you introduce high-stakes unpredictability, where pressing a single beacon might spawn a glorious loot piñata, or it might spawn an absolute nightmare entity that instantly wipes you out,
You create stories.
you remember it.
Mm.
Exactly. You create visceral moments that players will immediately clip and share with their friends.
It is the pure thrill of the casino injected right into the combat loop. But while they are adding risk to the combat, they are actually smoothing out the friction when it comes to endgame crafting risks.
Ah, the rune-forged gear.
Yes, we need to talk about the changes to rune-forged armors. To understand this, you have to look at the crafting economy. Rune forging is a system where you modify your gear with ancient magic, but it demands a blood sacrifice. In this case, your core defensive stats.
Right.
Players were actively avoiding rune forging their late game gear because the sacrifice to their base armor, evasion, and energy shield was just too steep. It made them too squishy.
The penalty outweighed the benefit. So the developers reduced the endgame penalty across the board. You now lose significantly less armor, evasion, and energy shield when rune forging, which removes a massive frustrating barrier to entry for late-game crafting.
It frees people up to actually use the system.
Exactly. It allows players to actually experiment with these powerful magical effects without completely crippling their character's survivability.
So what does this all mean? When you look at the entire scope of the patch, the unpredictable Val beacons, the reduced penalties for rune forging, the psychological choices in the simulacrums, the game is basically looking you in the eye and daring you.
Daring you to take the risk.
It is daring you to stop taking the safe, boring, highly optimized route. It wants you to roll the dice on a boss, juice the map with extra breach stones, press the corrupt button just to see what happens.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is shifting the fundamental player mindset. It is trying to move players away from, how do I extract mathematical resources as safely and efficiently as possible, and pushing them toward how much absolute danger can I realistically survive for the ultimate payout.
And that really brings us full circle on the massive shifts in patch 0.5.3. It is an absolute masterclass in aligning risk, reward, and the true value of your time.
It really is.
From replacing those junk chests in expeditions with guaranteed exceptional bases that actually matter for your crafting, to literally fixing the zero-spawn delirium bugs that were actively punishing the most dedicated players, to handing over total agency and control in the simulacrums.
It's a comprehensive effort to ensure every single piece of content feels vital to the ecosystem.
And the craziest part is that game director Jonathan Rogers teased that there is even more coming next week in patch 0.5.4. including more abilities for Aelith and improvements to the breach tablets to better boost those hives we talked about.
The iteration of the maze never truly stops.
It really doesn't. But as we wrap up this deep dive into the architecture of Rayclast, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to ponder. We started this conversation by talking about a game designer building an intricate maze, and players immediately finding the quickest, most boring shortcut to the cheese at the center.
The window chopper is ignoring the feast.
Exactly. But when a development team constantly has to release patches, overhaul economies, and redesign their fundamental systems just to stop players from optimizing the fun out of the game, who is really in charge of the experience? Is it the designer who meticulously builds the walls of the maze? Or is it the player who relentlessly finds the shortcut, forcing the walls to be moved?
It is a fascinating, endless, symbiotic relationship. They are constantly reacting to the footprints left by the other.
It really is the ultimate game of cat and mouse. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the systems around you, keep exploring those winding paths instead of taking the shortcut, and we'll catch you next time.